I'm Nelson, 32 years old, and until last Tuesday, I thought I had a solid relationship with my parents. Then my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. I stared at those words in a coffee shop, unable to process how my own family could cut me off without warning. The betrayal hit like a physical blow, especially after moving back to help care for my dad after his surgery. Before I dive into this painful story, tell me where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see how I turned this family betrayal into the biggest wake-up call of my life. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I had what most would consider a traditional American family. My father, Robert, worked as an accountant at a respected firm downtown, while my mother, Diane, taught 5th grade at the local elementary school. We lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house with a big backyard, where I spent countless summer days playing catch with neighborhood kids. My childhood wasn't perfect, but it was stable and secure. I was always the brainy kid in school, focused on computers and technology from an early age. My parents encouraged my academic pursuits, buying me my first computer when I was 12, and celebrating when I got accepted to MIT for computer science. They drove me all the way to Cambridge, Massachusetts, helped me set up my dorm room, and I remember my mom crying when they left. College was challenging but rewarding, and after graduation, I landed a software engineering job in Seattle. For 8 years, I built my career on the West Coast, visiting home for major holidays, but otherwise living independently. I rose through the ranks, quickly developing specialized expertise in cloud infrastructure that made me valuable in the industry. I made good money, had great friends, and even bought a condo overlooking Puget Sound. Life was good, and I thought my parents were proud of what I had accomplished. Then, 2 years ago, everything changed when my father needed triple bypass surgery. The recovery would be lengthy, and my mother called in tears, overwhelmed at the prospect of managing everything alone. I had just ended a long-term relationship that wasn't working out, and a major tech company in Chicago had been recruiting me for months. It felt like the universe was aligning to bring me back home. "We could really use your help, Nelson," my mother said during one particularly difficult call. "And it would mean so much to have you closer to home again." The decision wasn't easy, but ultimately I accepted the job offer, sold my Seattle condo, and moved back to Chicago. The initial plan was to stay with my parents temporarily while I searched for my own place. They insisted, saying it would help them out and save me money during the transition. At first, everything seemed perfect. I helped with my father's recovery, driving him to physical therapy appointments, and making sure he took his medications. My mother seemed grateful for the support, and we fell into a comfortable routine. I contributed to household expenses, helped with chores, and still maintained my independence with my demanding job. 6 months into this arrangement, I met Samantha at a tech conference in downtown Chicago. Smart, ambitious, and with a great sense of humor, she worked as a cybersecurity consultant for a competing firm. We hit it off immediately, sharing similar interests and career ambitions. When I introduced her to my parents, they seemed to welcome her, warmly inviting her to family dinners and including her in holiday celebrations. But looking back, I should have noticed the subtle signs that something was off. My mother began making little comments about my schedule when I spent evenings with Samantha. "We hardly see you anymore," she would say, despite the fact that I was literally living under their roof. My father would question my career decisions, suggesting that I should have negotiated for a higher salary or different responsibilities, even though I was thriving in my position. I started feeling increasingly monitored in their home. My mother would reorganize my room when I was at work, claiming she was just tidying up. My father would interrogate me about my finances, suggesting I wasn't saving enough despite my healthy bank account. These were small things individually, but collectively, they created a growing sense of unease. Then came the dinner that should have been my warning bell. It was about a year after I'd moved back, and Samantha and I had been dating for 6 months. We'd started discussing our future together, including the possibility of taking jobs abroad for a few years, an exciting opportunity with her company that would advance both our careers. "You know, Nelson," my father said, during dinner, pushing his plate aside, "at your age, I was already settled with a family and a mortgage. Your generation seems to struggle with commitment." "I'm not struggling with commitment, Dad," I replied, confused by his tone. "I'm just exploring options." "Options," my mother echoed with an unmistakable edge in her voice. That's what you call hopping from city to city, job to job. When are you going to put down roots? I was stunned. I moved back here to help you both. I've been here for a year already, and I've had exactly 2 jobs since college, both with excellent companies. We just worry about your lack of direction. My mother continued ignoring Samantha's increasingly uncomfortable expression. And this talk about moving abroad, it seems irresponsible. The conversation devolved from there into our first major argument since I'd returned. I defended my life choices, while they seemed determined to paint me as directionless and unreliable. Samantha tried to mediate, explaining the professional benefits of international experience, but they barely acknowledged her input. That night marked a turning point. I began to realize that perhaps my parents' vision for my return involved me settling permanently nearby, following a life path they approved of, rather than building my own. Still, I tried to maintain peace while accelerating my house hunt. 2 weeks before the text that changed everything, I found the perfect place, a renovated townhouse in a vibrant neighborhood close enough to visit my parents regularly, but far enough to have my own space. I made an offer which was accepted, and excitedly shared the news with my parents over breakfast. Their reaction was puzzling, polite congratulations that didn't reach their eyes, followed by questions about whether I was making a financial mistake. I assured them the purchase was well within my means, and that I'd done my due diligence, but they seemed oddly disappointed rather than happy for me. The morning I received the text was completely ordinary. I had a meeting with clients downtown, and stopped at my favorite coffee shop for breakfast. I was reviewing presentation slides when my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. The moment I read those words, "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore," my world tilted on its axis, and nothing would ever be the same again. The text came through at exactly 9:27 in the morning. I remember checking the timestamp repeatedly, as if somehow the numbers might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. I read and reread the message, convinced there must be some mistake. "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Please respect our decision and do not attempt to enter the property. Your behavior has left us no choice." My coffee went cold as I sat there paralyzed with confusion. What behavior? What decision? Just yesterday morning, my mother had asked what I wanted for dinner that evening, and I'd promised to pick up ice cream on my way home. Nothing in our recent interactions had hinted at this bombshell. My fingers trembled as I called my mother's number. Straight to voicemail. I tried my father. Same result. I sent text messages to both of them, asking for an explanation, pleading for clarification. No response. After 20 minutes of increasingly desperate attempts to reach them, I canceled my client meeting and drove to their house. My house too, or so I'd thought until 30 minutes ago. The familiar tree-lined street looked exactly the same, but as I approached our driveway, a sick feeling grew in my stomach. I parked and walked to the front door, the same door I'd exited that morning with a casual "See you tonight." When I tried my key, it didn't fit the lock. They had actually changed the locks. This wasn't a joke or a miscommunication. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone as I rang the doorbell repeatedly. I could see movement through the frosted glass panels. Someone was home, deliberately ignoring the bell. "Mom, Dad, please open the door." "What's happening?" I called out, my voice cracking with emotion. No response. Mr. Jenkins, our elderly neighbor who was watering his plants, looked over with undisguised curiosity. "Everything all right, Nelson?" he called. The humiliation burned through me. "Just a misunderstanding," I managed to reply, though it was clearly much more than that. I walked around to the back of the house, thinking maybe I could enter through the patio doors and figure out what was going on. Those locks had been changed too. Through the glass, I could see my mother in the kitchen, deliberately turning her back to the door when she noticed me. "Mom," I shouted, knocking on the glass. "Please talk to me. What's happening?" She pulled the curtains closed without looking at me. The reality of the situation began to sink in. This was planned, deliberate, and they had no intention of discussing it with me face to face. My childhood home, the place I'd returned to help my family, had been barred to me without warning or explanation. I retreated to my car and began calling my sister Jennifer, who lived in Milwaukee. No answer. I tried my Aunt Patricia, my father's brother, Thomas, even my cousin Michael. Either no one picked up, or they gave vague, uncomfortable responses about respecting my parents' wishes and giving them space. It became clear that whatever was happening, others in the family had been informed before me. The betrayal deepened with each unanswered call. After sitting in my car for nearly an hour, I noticed something by the side of the house. 3 black garbage bags and 2 cardboard boxes, with my name scrawled across them in my father's handwriting, my belongings apparently. I loaded them into my trunk, fighting back tears of confusion and anger. A quick inventory revealed they'd packed some of my clothes, books, and toiletries, but many things were missing. My laptop docking station that I needed for work. Important documents like my birth certificate and social security card. Family photographs. Gifts from Samantha. Even my grandfather's watch that my father had given me when I graduated from MIT was nowhere to be found. With nowhere else to go, I drove to Samantha's apartment. She listened in shocked disbelief as I explained what had happened, then immediately offered her spare room for as long as I needed it. "This makes no sense, Nelson," she said, helping me carry in the garbage bags of my possessions. "Did something happen recently that might have triggered this?" I racked my brain, reviewing every interaction from the past week. Nothing stood out. We'd had dinner together most nights. I'd helped my father with his new blood pressure medication routine. My mother and I had watched her favorite cooking show just 2 nights ago, laughing together at the contestants' mishaps. As the day wore on, more disturbing details emerged. I called my bank to order a new debit card, worried that my parents might have access to my financial information, since mail addressed to me came to their house. The bank representative informed me that someone had attempted to access my account online that morning, but had been blocked due to incorrect security answers. Then Samantha found something that sent chills down my spine. A social media post from my mother, published just an hour after her text to me. Sometimes the hardest thing a parent can do is practice tough love, praying for our son to find his way back to responsibility and gratitude. The comments section was filled with supportive messages from family, friends, and relatives, many expressing how difficult it must be to stay strong in such a situation. My mother had been crafting a narrative about me that bore no resemblance to reality, and people were believing it without question. "They've been planning this," I realized aloud, the shock giving way to a hollow ache. This wasn't spontaneous. They've been setting this up for days, maybe weeks. Samantha squeezed my hand as we scrolled through more posts that painted me as ungrateful and irresponsible. There were vague references to disrespectful behavior and concerning choices without any specific examples. Calls and messages from extended family started coming in, not to offer support, but to express disappointment in my treatment of my parents. My cousin Eliza texted, "Your mom is heartbroken. Whatever is going on with you, they're just trying to help." I tried responding, explaining that I had been blindsided and had no idea what they were referring to, but it was clear most had already accepted my parents' version of events. The narrative was established, and I was somehow the villain in a story I didn't even understand. That night, lying on Samantha's pull-out couch, surrounded by garbage bags containing the fragments of my life, I felt a profound sense of displacement. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had not only shut me out, but had deliberately damaged my reputation and relationships in the process. The confusion and hurt gradually gave way to something else, a simmering anger that would ultimately fuel my next steps. Whatever game my parents were playing, I wouldn't be a passive participant any longer. I needed answers, and I needed to reclaim the truth of my own life. The morning after being locked out of my home, I made an appointment with a lawyer named Marcus Daniels who specialized in family law and property disputes. While waiting for the appointment later that day, I started methodically documenting everything that had happened, creating a timeline of events and gathering what evidence I had. "This is unusual to say the least," Marcus said after I explained my situation. His office was minimalist and organized much like his thinking. "Legally speaking, even though you were living with your parents, you established residency there. They can't just change the locks without proper notice." "So what can I do?" I asked, desperate for direction. "First, we'll send a formal letter demanding access to retrieve all of your belongings. Second, we need to understand what prompted this. Have you checked your credit report? Your accounts? Often, when family dynamics shift this dramatically, there's a financial component. Following his advice, I began digging deeper. What I discovered over the next several days left me reeling. While using Samantha's laptop to check my email, I noticed some of my sent messages didn't look familiar. Someone had been accessing my personal email account. I immediately changed all my passwords and enabled two-factor authentication, then began examining account activity logs. The evidence was undeniable logins from an IP address I recognized as my parents' home network dating back several months. Someone had been reading my emails regularly, including personal communications with Samantha and professional exchanges with colleagues. They've been monitoring me, I told Samantha that evening, feeling violated on a fundamental level, for months at least. Samantha, whose cybersecurity background proved invaluable, helped me conduct a more thorough investigation. We discovered my computer at my parents' house had keylogging software, installed a program that records every keystroke, capturing passwords and private communications. Given my father's limited technical knowledge, this suggested a deliberate effort to surveil me that went beyond casual snooping. Check your phone too, Samantha suggested. Sure enough, we found unfamiliar apps buried in folders, monitoring software that could track my location and potentially access messages and calls. As disturbing as these discoveries were, they still didn't explain the sudden lockout. The answer came from an unexpected source, my bank statement. While reviewing recent transactions, I noticed several large transfers from my savings account to my checking account in the past month, followed by withdrawals from ATMs I hadn't visited. "Someone's been taking money from your account," Samantha asked, looking over my shoulder at the screen. "Not exactly," I said slowly, as realization dawned. "The transfers are legitimate. I moved that money for my house down payment, but I never made these cash withdrawals." We pieced it together. Through monitoring my emails, my parents had learned about my house purchase. They had access to my financial information and apparently misinterpreted the large transfers as me planning to leave abruptly, perhaps even moving abroad with Samantha, an idea we had only casually discussed but had appeared in our private messages. The ATM withdrawals were more concerning. Someone had attempted to use my card, succeeding a few times before incorrect PIN entries locked the account. The bank confirmed the attempts were made at locations near my parents' home. Then came the most shocking discovery of all. Among the few belongings they'd packed for me was a notebook I didn't recognize. It was my mother's journal, and whether she included it intentionally or by mistake, it provided the missing puzzle pieces. The entries dated back to shortly after I'd started dating Samantha. Initial notes expressed concern about how quickly the relationship was progressing. Later entries became increasingly paranoid, interpreting innocent conversations about travel and career opportunities as evidence of instability and irresponsibility. One passage sent chills down my spine. "Robert and I agree. We need to save Nelson from himself. His girlfriend is leading him astray with fantasies of living abroad. He's withdrawing large sums of money. We fear he might be in some kind of trouble. As his parents, it's our responsibility to intervene before he ruins his life." Another entry detailed conversations with extended family members, framing their concerns in ways that painted me as potentially mentally unwell. "We've spoken with Patricia and Thomas about our concerns for Nelson's mental state. They agree an intervention might be necessary." Through their distorted lens, my independence had become defiance. My relationship with Samantha was a threat. My career ambitions were evidence of instability. The narrative they'd constructed bore no resemblance to reality, but they had committed to it completely. My investigation took another disturbing turn when I contacted the real estate agent handling my house purchase. "I was going to call you," she said, sounding confused. "We received a strange call from someone claiming to be your father, saying you were having second thoughts about the purchase. He asked detailed questions about the cancellation policy and mentioned concerns about your mental health affecting the contract validity. They had attempted to sabotage my home, purchase the very independence they supposedly wanted me to demonstrate." The final revelation came from my workplace. My manager called, concerned about an email they'd received from my family doctor, expressing concern about my mental health and suggesting I might need leave. The email was fake, sent from a newly created account. "Nelson, I think your parents are trying to establish a paper trail. Marcus said when I shared these discoveries. They're building a narrative where you're unstable or incapacitated in some way. This goes beyond a family disagreement. But why, I asked, still struggling to comprehend the scale of their deception. Control, Samantha said quietly. This is about control. They had you back home after years of independence, and they're terrified of losing that control again. The pieces fit together into a disturbing picture. My parents had constructed an elaborate fiction, one where I needed saving from myself, where my independence was reframed as instability, and where their controlling behavior was justified as parental concern. I thought about the GPS tracking app I'd found on my phone, the keylogger on my computer, the monitoring of my emails and finances. This wasn't love or concern. It was surveillance and manipulation. So what do I do now? I asked Marcus during our follow-up meeting. His expression was grave as he reviewed my evidence. We document everything. We secure your accounts and information, and we prepare for the possibility that this could escalate further. Based on what you've shown me, your parents are unlikely to simply acknowledge what they've done and back down. As I left his office, I felt a strange mix of clarity and dread. The mystery of my parents' behavior had been solved, but the solution was far worse than I could have imagined. They weren't just temporarily angry or confused, they had committed to a systematic campaign to undermine my independence, relationships, and reputation. What began as confusion had evolved into investigation, and now the evidence pointed toward a disturbing truth. This was about control, not love. And I needed to protect myself from the very people who should have been protecting me. The day after my meeting with Marcus, my father showed up at my office building. I was in the middle of a team meeting when my phone buzzed with a text from reception. There's a Robert Preston here, insisting on seeing you. Says it's a family emergency. My heart raced as I excused myself from the meeting. In the lobby, my father stood with a stern expression that softened into concern when others were watching a performance I now recognized. "Nelson, we need to talk," he said, trying to place a hand on my shoulder. I stepped back. "We do need to talk," I replied quietly, "but not here at my workplace. Your mother and I are worried sick about you. This behavior—" "What behavior exactly?" I interrupted, keeping my voice level, despite the anger building inside me. "Moving out, having a girlfriend, buying my own house." His expression hardened. "You know exactly what we're talking about. These delusions about us monitoring you, stealing from you. Samantha has clearly been filling your head with paranoid thoughts." I felt like I'd been doused with cold water. He was gaslighting me, denying things I had concrete evidence of. "Dad, please leave. This isn't the place for this conversation." "I'm still your father," he said, voice rising. "You don't give me orders." Security was watching us now. My colleagues could see through the glass walls of the conference room. This public confrontation was exactly what I didn't want. "Either we talk somewhere private, or I'm going back to work," I stated firmly. "This is why we had to take drastic measures," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "You refuse to listen to reason. Your mother can barely eat from worry." A security guard approached. "Sir, is everything okay here?" Before I could answer, my father said, "My son is having some difficulties. We're concerned about his mental state." The humiliation burned through me. "Everything's fine," I told the guard. "My father was just leaving." "Nelson, please," my father said, his voice shifting to a pleading tone that seemed calculated for our audience. "Let us help you." "I'm going back to my meeting," I said, turning away. "Please don't come to my workplace again." As I walked back to the conference room, I could feel eyes on me. My father's public display had achieved exactly what he wanted, planting seeds of doubt about my stability among my colleagues. That night, the situation escalated further. My phone began ringing with calls from relatives. I rarely spoke with an uncle in Florida, a cousin in Texas, even my mother's sister whom I hadn't seen in years. All expressed concern about my well-being, all referenced information that could only have come from my parents, and all suggested I should listen to reason and reconcile. "Your cousin Michael said you accused your parents of spying on you," Samantha said, showing me a social media message she'd received. "They're reaching out to everyone connected to you." The next morning, Samantha received a call from her supervisor. Someone claiming to be concerned about employee welfare had contacted her company, suggesting she was in an unstable relationship that might compromise her work in cybersecurity. The implication that our relationship might be a security risk was a direct attack on her career. "This is crossing so many lines," she said, visibly shaken after the call. "They're trying to damage my professional reputation now." We didn't have to wonder who they were. The pattern was unmistakable. 3 days after my confrontation with my father, a police officer knocked on Samantha's door. "We received a wellness check request," he explained. A concerned family member reported potentially unstable behavior. I maintained my composure as I explained the situation, showing the officer the legal paperwork Marcus had prepared documenting the harassment. The officer seemed sympathetic, but advised me to resolve the family matter quickly. As soon as the officer left, I called Marcus. "They're escalating," I told him. "Using the police for wellness checks, contacting our employers, this is getting out of hand." Document everything, he advised. Every call, every contact. We're building a case for harassment. My parents' campaign extended to social media, where my mother posted vague but concerning updates about adult children struggling with reality and the heartbreak of watching someone you love make destructive choices. Without naming me directly, she created a narrative that friends and family could easily connect to the rumors already circulating. The posts included carefully selected photos from my childhood and teenage years, times when I had struggled with normal adolescent issues or made typical teenage mistakes. Out of context, accompanied by her worried commentary, these memories were reframed as evidence of long-standing problems. Friends began messaging me, confused by the contradiction between the person they knew and the troubled individual my parents were describing. "Dude, is everything okay?" texted my college roommate. "Your mom's posts have me worried." My boss called me into his office the following week. "Nelson, I've received some unusual communications regarding your situation," he said carefully. "Normally I wouldn't mention personal matters, but when they're directed to the company repeatedly, I need to address them." He showed me printed emails from both my parents expressing grave concerns about my mental health and suggesting the company should monitor my access to sensitive systems. They had even attached fabricated medical assessments suggesting I was experiencing delusions. "I want to be clear," my boss continued, "that these messages have no bearing on how we view your work or professionalism. But I need to understand what's happening, to protect both you and the company." I explained the situation as calmly and clearly as I could, sharing the documentation Marcus had helped me compile. My boss listened attentively, his concern shifting from me to my parents as the pattern of harassment became clear. "Take whatever time you need to address this," he said finally, "and let me know how we can support you. We can restrict communications from them and alert security if necessary." His support was a rare bright spot in the increasingly dark situation, but the stress was taking its toll. I lost weight, struggled to sleep, and found it difficult to concentrate. Samantha suggested I speak with a therapist, and I agreed, recognizing that professional support was necessary to navigate the emotional impact of my parents' betrayal. Dr. Rachel Bennett specialized in family trauma and helped me understand the patterns at play. "What you're describing has elements of what we call narcissistic family systems," she explained during our second session. "The extreme reaction to your independence, the manipulation of extended family, the public smear campaign, these are unfortunately common tactics when control is threatened." With her guidance, I began to recognize how certain dynamics in my childhood, subtle but persistent, had laid the groundwork for the current crisis. My parents had always been invested in presenting a perfect family image, had struggled when I made choices they wouldn't have made, and had used guilt and emotional manipulation when direct control wasn't possible. "This isn't your fault," Dr. Bennett emphasized, "and you're taking the right steps to protect yourself. Boundaries are healthy and necessary, especially when someone demonstrates they don't respect your autonomy." Those boundaries were tested again when my parents violated the cease and desist letter Marcus had sent by showing up at Samantha's workplace. Her colleagues watched uncomfortably as my mother tearfully pleaded with Samantha to help Nelson get the help he needs. Security had to escort them from the building. The incident crystallized something for me: this wouldn't stop without more decisive action. My parents had demonstrated they were willing to risk their own reputations, break the law, and harm my relationships in their crusade to regain control. "We need to pursue a restraining order," I told Marcus that evening. "They're not respecting any boundaries." He nodded grimly. "Based on the pattern of escalation, I agree. We have sufficient documentation now to make a compelling case." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange mix of resolve and sadness. I was preparing to legally prohibit my own parents from contacting me, an outcome I could never have imagined just weeks earlier. But their actions had made it clear this was no longer about family disagreements, but about protecting myself from deliberate, coordinated harm. The escalation had pushed me to a breaking point, but it had also clarified what I needed to do. If my parents wouldn't respect my boundaries voluntarily, then legal enforcement was the only option left. The morning of the restraining order hearing arrived with a weight of finality. I had barely slept, spending hours reviewing the documentation with Marcus and preparing myself mentally for facing my parents in court. Remember, Marcus advised as we walked up the courthouse steps, stick to the facts. Don't get drawn into emotional arguments or justifications. The evidence speaks for itself. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that seemed too harsh for the emotional weight of the proceedings. My parents were already seated with their attorney, a stern-looking woman in her 50s. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while my father sat rigidly, his jaw set in a hard line. They didn't look like people who had monitored my communications, spread false rumors about my mental health, or tried to sabotage my career and relationship. They looked like worried parents, exactly the image they wanted to project. When the judge called our case, Marcus presented our petition, methodically detailing the pattern of harassment, the unauthorized access to my accounts, the workplace intrusions, the false reports to authorities, the coordinated family pressure campaign. He submitted affidavits from Samantha, my boss, and colleagues, who had witnessed my father's outburst at my office. My parents' attorney portrayed them as concerned parents, taking reasonable steps to help a son experiencing a personal crisis. She characterized my house purchase and relationship with Samantha as sudden changes in behavior that had legitimately worried them. "Your Honor," she said, "these are loving parents who perhaps overstepped in their concern, but their actions were motivated by care, not harassment." The judge, a woman with silver hair and penetrating eyes, turned to my parents. "I'd like to hear from you directly. Why did you change the locks on your home without notice to your son?" My mother spoke first, her voice trembling. "We were afraid. Nelson had been behaving erratically, withdrawing large sums of money. We found searches on his computer about moving overseas. We thought an intervention was necessary." "And you believed locking him out of his residence without his belongings was an appropriate intervention?" the judge asked. "We tried talking to him," my father interjected. "He wouldn't listen. We were desperate. Did you at any point consider that as an adult, your son has the right to make his own decisions? Even decisions you disagree with?" The judge pressed. My father's composure slipped. Not when those decisions are clearly self-destructive. He was throwing away his career, getting involved with a woman who was a bad influence. Robert, their attorney, warned quietly. But my father continued, his voice rising. "We have a right to protect our son. We have a right to be involved in his life." The judge's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Preston, your son is 32 years old. The law recognizes his right to make his own choices, whether you agree with them or not." When it was my turn to speak, I focused on the facts as Marcus had advised, keeping my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. "I returned to Chicago to help my parents during my father's recovery from heart surgery," I explained. "I contributed to household expenses, maintained my career, and was actively purchasing my own home when they locked me out without warning. Their subsequent actions, accessing my private communications, contacting my employer with false claims, harassing my girlfriend at her workplace, demonstrate a pattern of behavior aimed at controlling my life rather than supporting my independence." As I spoke, I could see my mother's expression shift from performative sadness to something harder, colder, a glimpse of the determination beneath the concern she projected. The turning point came when Marcus presented evidence of the keylogging software installed on my computer and the monitoring apps on my phone. He showed bank records documenting the unauthorized access attempts and emails from my parents to my workplace making false claims about my mental health. Your Honor, Marcus concluded, this goes far beyond parental concern. This is a systematic campaign to undermine Mr. Preston's autonomy, relationships, and professional standing. The judge reviewed the evidence carefully before delivering her decision. Based on the documentation presented, I find sufficient evidence of harassment to issue a temporary restraining order. Mr. and Mrs. Preston are to have no contact with their son, either directly or through third parties, and must remain at least 100 yards from his person, residence, and workplace. She looked directly at my parents. I strongly suggest you reflect on your actions and seek appropriate counseling. What you've demonstrated here is not parental concern, but an unhealthy inability to respect boundaries. As she finished speaking, my mother let out a sob that echoed through the courtroom. My father's face flushed deep red. "This is outrageous," he shouted, rising to his feet. "We have rights as parents." "Mr. Preston," the judge said firmly, "outbursts like that only confirm the concerns raised here today. I suggest you compose yourself before you complicate your situation further." As court officers moved toward my agitated father, their attorney pulled him back into his seat, whispering urgently in his ear. The judge concluded the hearing, and Marcus guided me toward the exit. In the hallway outside, my parents' public composure completely collapsed. My mother wailed loudly, while my father shouted at their attorney. "This is not over," he called after me. "You can't do this to your own family." The scene attracted attention from everyone in the corridor, including several attorneys from other cases who watched with professional curiosity. The public meltdown was the final confirmation that everything I had done was necessary. With the restraining order in place, I could finally reclaim my belongings from my parents' home. 2 police officers accompanied me the following day, standing impassively as I gathered what remained of my possessions. My parents had been required to leave during this process to comply with the restraining order's distance requirements. Walking through the silent house, my childhood home now feeling like a hostile space, was surreal. Many of my belongings had been disturbed, or were missing entirely. My desk drawers had been emptied, their contents nowhere to be found. My closet was half empty. The framed MIT diploma that had hung on my wall was gone. In my father's home office, I discovered a locked filing cabinet. With permission from the officers, I forced it open and found many of my missing documents. My birth certificate, passport, social security card, along with printed copies of my emails, bank statements, and even conversations with Samantha that could only have been captured through the surveillance software. Most disturbing of all was a journal detailing their intervention plan in my father's meticulous handwriting. It outlined steps they had already taken and future actions they planned, including contacting my physician to discuss involuntary treatment options and consulting with a lawyer about whether they could challenge my mental competence to invalidate my house purchase. "Is that yours?" one of the officers asked, noticing my expression as I read. "No," I replied quietly, "but it's about me." I photographed each page before taking the journal with me, additional evidence of how far they had been willing to go. That night, as I organized my recovered belongings in Samantha's apartment, the emotional weight of the day finally hit me. These were the people who had raised me, who had driven me to college with tears in their eyes, who had taught me right from wrong. How had we arrived at this point? How had love transformed into something so controlling and destructive? I never thought I'd need a restraining order against my own parents. I said to Samantha, my voice breaking for the first time since this ordeal began. She sat beside me, her hand warm on my back. "You did what you needed to do to protect yourself. Their choices led to this outcome, not yours." As painful as the court experience had been, it marked a necessary breaking point. My parents had been forced to confront the consequences of their actions in a public forum. The fantasy that they could control my life through manipulation and pressure had been legally challenged and rejected. The restraining order wouldn't solve everything. The emotional damage couldn't be undone with a legal document, but it established a boundary that even they couldn't ignore. For the first time since receiving that text message, I felt like I could breathe again. I could plan my next steps without constantly looking over my shoulder. That night I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The official court document on my nightstand, a tangible reminder that I had stood up for myself, and my right to live my own life. The breaking point had been reached and survived. Now came the process of rebuilding. With the restraining order in place providing temporary protection, it was time to develop a longer-term strategy. The immediate crisis had been addressed, but I needed sustainable solutions to move forward with my life. My first priority was housing. The townhouse I had originally planned to purchase had sold to another buyer during the chaos, so I contacted a different real estate agent, Lisa Martinez, who specialized in quick closings. Given your situation, we should focus on properties that are vacant, or where the sellers are motivated, Lisa advised during our first meeting. And I suggest we keep your search confidential, no social media posts about viewings or locations. Her caution was warranted. Despite the restraining order, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Samantha had helped secure my digital life. New email addresses enhanced security on all accounts, a new phone number. But the psychological impact of the surveillance lingered. Within 2 weeks, Lisa found a promising property, a modern condo in a secure building, with doorman service and private parking. It wasn't what I had originally envisioned, but its security features were exactly what I needed. The sellers are relocating for work and need to close quickly, Lisa explained. We can make this happen within 30 days if you're interested. I made an offer that same day, and it was accepted. The knowledge that I would soon have my own secure space brought tremendous relief. Professionally, I needed to address the impact of my parents' interference. My boss had been supportive, but I was concerned about lasting damage to my reputation. I scheduled a meeting with him and the HR director to discuss the situation openly. I want to be transparent about what's happened and ensure it doesn't affect my standing here. I explained sharing the restraining order documentation and court findings. Your work has always been exemplary, my boss assured me, but I appreciate your professionalism in addressing this directly. We can add measures to screen communications more carefully and alert security to the situation. The HR director suggested a modified work arrangement that would provide additional flexibility. We can set you up for more remote work if that would help during this transition period. We have several team members who work remotely full-time. Their support was invaluable, not just practically, but emotionally. My workplace was recognizing and respecting my boundaries in ways my own parents had not. With housing and work addressed, Marcus and I developed a comprehensive legal strategy. The temporary restraining order would expire, and we needed to determine next steps. Based on their reaction in court, I'm concerned they won't respect the boundaries without ongoing legal consequences, Marcus said during our strategy session. We should prepare for either a permanent restraining order or a formal settlement agreement with enforceable terms. We were discussing options when Marcus received an email from my parents' attorney requesting an urgent meeting. They want to discuss resolution options, he said, showing me the message. This could be significant. Either they're recognizing the severity of the situation or they're planning something new. After careful consideration, we agreed to the meeting with specific conditions. It would take place at Marcus's office. With both attorneys present, all communication would go through the attorneys and the restraining order terms would be strictly observed. 3 days later, I sat across from my parents' attorney, Catherine Wilson, in Marcus's conference room. My parents were not present, respecting the restraining order's distance requirements. My clients recognize that the situation has escalated beyond what anyone intended. Catherine began, her tone carefully professional. They want to find a path forward that addresses everyone's concerns. Marcus maintained a neutral expression. We're willing to listen to proposals, but any resolution must include acknowledgement of the harm caused and concrete steps to prevent further issues. Catherine nodded and opened a folder. My clients are prepared to acknowledge that their actions were inappropriate and caused distress. They're willing to commit to counseling to address the underlying issues. In exchange, they hope to eventually restore some form of relationship with their son with appropriate boundaries in place. She slid a document across the table, a proposed settlement agreement. As Marcus and I reviewed it, the true motivation became clear. The agreement included language that would prevent me from discussing my parents' actions publicly or pursuing any claims against them. This is primarily concerned with protecting your client's reputation, Marcus observed. There's very little here that addresses the actual harm caused or provides meaningful protection moving forward. My clients are facing significant consequences already, Catherine countered. Mr. Preston's father's colleagues are aware of the restraining order. They've experienced social repercussions in their community. They're offering an olive branch. I remained silent, allowing Marcus to handle the negotiation while I processed what I was hearing. They were worried about their reputation, about social standing, about appearances, the same concerns that had driven their behavior from the beginning. We'll need substantial revisions, Marcus said finally, including financial compensation for property that was damaged or withheld counseling requirements, with verification-specific communication protocols if contact is eventually resumed, and public correction of false statements made about my client. Catherine's expression tightened. Financial compensation seems excessive for a family matter. This ceased to be merely a family matter when Mr. Plazen, Preston's parents installed surveillance software on his devices, attempted to access his bank accounts, and contacted his employer with false claims about his mental health. Marcus interrupted firmly. Those actions had tangible costs, both financial and professional. The negotiation continued for nearly 2 hours, with proposals and counterproposals exchanged. Throughout the process, I maintained my resolve on key points. I would not agree to silence about what had happened. I would not resume contact without verified counseling progress, and I would not accept vague promises of changed behavior. As the meeting concluded, Catherine said she would present our counterproposal to her clients. I should warn you that they may find some of these terms difficult to accept, particularly the public statement requirement. The alternative is a permanent restraining order hearing, where all of this becomes public record, Marcus reminded her. The choice is theirs. 2 days later, Catherine sent a curt email rejecting our proposal and suggesting alternative terms that still prioritized my parents' reputation over my well-being. Marcus and I were discussing next steps when my phone displayed an email notification that made my stomach drop. A message from Catherine Wilson with the subject line, "Urgent. We have a problem. Call immediately." I forwarded it to Marcus without opening it. "What do you make of this?" I asked during our subsequent call. "It could be a genuine development, or it could be an attempt to establish direct contact in violation of the restraining order," he said cautiously. "I'll reach out to Catherine through proper channels." The urgent problem became clear the following day. My parents had attempted to contact my new employer, directly unaware that I had already disclosed the situation to my boss and HR. Their message had been flagged and forwarded to legal, potentially creating new legal issues for them. They're facing possible criminal charges for violating the restraining order, Marcus explained after speaking with Catherine. Suddenly, our settlement terms look more reasonable to them. With this leverage, we resumed negotiations from a position of strength. The revised agreement that eventually emerged included everything we had initially requested: financial compensation for lost property and legal fees, mandatory counseling with progress reports provided to Marcus, a public statement, correcting false claims, and a structured communication protocol if contact were ever to resume. Most importantly, it included an explicit acknowledgement that their behavior had been inappropriate and harmful, an admission that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Before you sign, Marcus advised, be certain this is what you want. A permanent restraining order remains an option, and it would create a clearer legal boundary. I considered carefully. The agreement offered accountability, while leaving open the possibility, however distant, of a healthier relationship in the future. The restraining order would provide stronger legal protection, but close the door more completely. I want them to acknowledge what they did, I decided finally. I want them to do the work of understanding why it was wrong. This agreement requires that with consequences if they don't comply. When the signing meeting arrived, I saw my parents for the first time since the court hearing. They looked smaller somehow. My father's confident posture diminished my mother's carefully maintained appearance, showing signs of strain. They avoided eye contact as Catherine explained the final terms. When it came time to sign, my mother's hand trembled slightly. My father's jaw worked as though he were physically restraining himself from speaking. But they signed every page, every provision, acknowledging their actions and committing to change. As I added my own signature, I felt no triumph or vindication, only a somber recognition that our relationship had been fundamentally altered. The papers formalized what I had been forced to accept. The parents I thought I had were not the parents who had been revealed through this crisis. "This isn't what any of us wanted," my mother said quietly, as they prepared to leave, breaking the carefully maintained silence. "We only wanted what was best for you." I looked at her directly for the first time. "No. You wanted what you thought was best for me, without ever asking what I needed, or respecting my right to make my own choices. That's why we're here." They left without further comment, the signed agreement, establishing new boundaries that would govern whatever relationship might exist between us in the future. That evening, I sat with Samantha on the balcony of my new condo, watching the city lights flicker against the darkening sky. "How do you feel?" she asked, her hand warm in mine. "Like I can breathe again," I replied after a moment. "Like I can finally start rebuilding without looking over my shoulder." The strategic response had done what it needed to do, created space and boundaries within which healing could begin. It wasn't the resolution I would have chosen, but it was the one that offered the best path forward from an impossible situation. As difficult as the process had been, it had forced a reckoning that was perhaps long overdue. The fantasy of who my parents were had been replaced by a clearer understanding of who they actually were, and with that clarity came the freedom to build a life based on reality rather than illusion. 6 months after signing the settlement agreement, I stood in the kitchen of my condo, morning sunlight streaming through the windows as I brewed coffee. The space had gradually transformed from an empty refuge to a true home, filled with carefully chosen furniture, books, and art that reflected my tastes and interests rather than someone else's expectations. The security features that had initially attracted me to the building, the doorman, the private parking, the secure entry system, had become background elements rather than daily reassurances. I no longer started at unexpected texts or scrutinized unfamiliar cars on the street. The hypervigilance had slowly receded as weeks passed without incident. My relationship with Samantha had deepened through the crisis. Having witnessed each other at our most vulnerable, we shared a connection that felt honest and resilient. She had recently moved in, bringing her warmth and energy to spaces that might otherwise have held lingering shadows of the past. "Coffee ready?" she asked, emerging from the bedroom in running clothes. "I want to get a quick 5 miles in before brunch with Lisa and Michael." Lisa and Michael were part of the new friendship circle we'd built, people who knew our story but hadn't been entangled in the family drama. They represented the fresh start we'd both needed, relationships built on mutual interests and genuine connection rather than obligation or history. "Almost ready," I replied, pouring her a travel mug. "How late do you think brunch will go?" I promised to call Jennifer at 2. My relationship with my sister had required careful rebuilding. Initially swayed by our parents' narrative, she had maintained distance during the worst of the crisis. It was only after seeing the evidence and the court's findings that she began to question her understanding of the situation. Our reconnection had been tentative at first, cautious texts, brief calls that carefully avoided certain topics. Gradually, we established a new dynamic, one that acknowledged the family dysfunction without being defined by it. She remained in contact with our parents but respected my boundaries and never pressed for reconciliation. As for my parents themselves, the terms of our agreement established a structured, limited form of contact. After 3 months of verified counseling sessions, they were permitted to send a monthly email through Marcus, which he would forward to me after review. I could choose whether to respond. Their initial messages had been stiff and defensive, filled with subtle implications that I was overreacting or that they were the injured parties. Over time, the tone had shifted, showing glimmers of genuine reflection. My mother's most recent email had included for the first time an acknowledgement that took responsibility without qualification. "I understand now that our fear of losing you led us to behaviors that ultimately pushed you away," she had written. "The control we thought was protection was actually a failure to see you as the capable adult you've become. I am truly sorry for the pain we caused." I hadn't responded immediately, allowing myself time to process her words and check in with my own feelings. Dr. Bennett, who had continued as my therapist through the recovery period, had helped me develop tools for this exact situation. Take time to distinguish between what you hope her words mean and what they actually demonstrate, she had advised. Look for patterns over time, not isolated statements. And remember, that forgiveness, if it comes, is for your benefit, not an obligation you owe to someone else. The healing process had extended to every aspect of my life. Professionally, I had thrived, despite the disruption, even accepting a promotion that involved occasional international travel, the very independence that had triggered my parents' extreme reaction. My boss had become a mentor and advocate, impressed by how I had handled myself through the crisis. My financial life had been completely restructured for security. New accounts at different institutions, comprehensive monitoring services, and regular check-ins with a financial advisor ensured that I would never again be vulnerable in that particular way. Perhaps most significantly, I had developed a deeper understanding of family dynamics and healthy boundaries that informed all my relationships. The painful lessons had produced valuable wisdom about recognizing manipulation, trusting my instincts, and requiring respectful treatment from others. Thanksgiving had been the first major holiday after the crisis, traditionally a time when family expectations ran highest. Instead of forcing myself into an uncomfortable situation or sitting alone with regrets, Samantha and I had hosted a chosen family, gathering friends who found themselves without plans or avoiding their own difficult family situations. We had cooked together, shared stories, played games, and created new traditions that honored connection without obligation. It had been healing in ways I hadn't anticipated, proving that meaningful celebration didn't require sacrificing authenticity or boundaries. As the months passed, I found myself less defined by what had happened and more focused on what I was building. The crisis had revealed strengths I hadn't known. I possessed resilience, clarity, the courage to stand firm, even when standing alone. There were still difficult moments. Certain songs or smells could trigger memories of my childhood home. Holidays brought complicated emotions. Seeing parents and children together in public sometimes created an unexpected ache, but these moments became less frequent and less overwhelming as time passed. My mother's letter expressing genuine remorse had arrived almost exactly 6 months after the agreement was signed. I had read it several times, discussing it with Dr. Bennett and Samantha, examining my own readiness to engage with what it offered. After careful consideration, I had sent a brief response, not rushing to forgiveness or reconciliation, but acknowledging the steps she had taken and expressing cautious hope that their therapy was proving beneficial. It was a small opening, carefully bounded by the protective structures we had put in place. Whether it would lead to a transformed relationship or simply a more respectful distance remained to be seen. What mattered was that the choice was mine, informed by clear understanding rather than manipulation or obligation. Standing in my kitchen that morning, watching Samantha head out for her run with a wave and a smile, I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. The home we were creating together wasn't defined by walls and locks, but by mutual respect, shared values, and the freedom to grow both individually and together. The text message that had begun this journey, "We changed all the locks, you don't have a home anymore," had delivered an unintended truth. The place where I had grown up, filled with complex memories and unacknowledged tensions, had never truly been my home in the deepest sense. Home was something I was building now, deliberately and authentically, with clear eyes about what I needed and deserved. If you've ever had to stand up against family pressure to live your own truth, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. How did you find the courage to set boundaries with loved ones? Did you have a support system that helped you through it? Like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that. They're not alone in facing family challenges. Remember, sometimes the family we choose becomes our greatest strength. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to create a life that truly belongs to you, surrounded by people who respect your boundaries and celebrate your journey.